Welcome to another episode of Will's Personal Development Show podcast, and I am Will. Today we have an exciting episode. I will try and be somewhat concise. We're going to be talking about lessons you can learn from the world's best poker and chess players of all time that you can implement into your life. Not just for chess, but in terms of acquiring any skill or sometimes just your general performance, success, and happiness in life. Now, this episode was inspired by the most latest Netflix original TV series that has been just making waves on Netflix. It was recently released. It's called The Queen's Gambit. I'm sure you've heard of it. If you haven't, it's starting to make waves. People are starting to talk about it. It's been the number one watched show on Netflix for the last few days. And it is a miniseries on a fictional story about a female prodigy chess player. It's really well done and really just kind of explores kind of the authentic and sometimes dark, real nature of uh, a person's life. So, with that being said, there's a lot more interest in chess, and it's gotten me more fascinated about it too. Now, I've already compiled a lot of information about chess in my previous blogs on my website, willyoulaugh.com. And that's not so much because I want to be a better chess or poker player. I mean, slightly because it's entertaining to play, but it's more so because I felt like these masters with that require such high levels of thinking and intelligence. I'm sure they have some things that I can learn from them that you can use to apply to other areas. And I was right. So, let's just keep the intro short. Whenever I hear a long intro, I'm just like, okay, just get to the facts. Let's hear the tips. So let's do that. And just for credibility's sake, because some people will be like, well, where's this info coming from? It comes from my study of uh, some books and some courses and videos of masters. Gary Kasparov, widely regarded as the best chess player of all time. He's written a few books. One particularly called From the Boardroom to the Chessboard, How to Win at the Game of Chess and Life. So he wrote the book not just to apply it to chess, but to life as well as I'm going through Gary Kasparov's masterclass.com course. Check that out. If you want to check out masterclass.com, um, I have a link that'll take you directly there, and you can sometimes get a little discount through my link, willyoulaugh.com/masterclass. And of course, other research from experts, including Josh Waitzkin, who wrote uh, The Art of Learning. The Art of Learning is a podcast, it's a book that covers a prodigy, Josh Waitzkin, who became the top chess player in the U.S., had a famous film made of him, searching for Bobby Fischer, and then he became a world champion at a martial art, Tai Chi Chuan push hands. So I'm compiling all that together. Let's get to it. Now, I think the first tip that I found as a pattern was that you should play to your own personality. I found this fascinating. With no real basis, I just assumed or just guessed that, I don't know if chess has ideal way of playing. Um, and turns out that's not the case. Gary Kasparov recommends that, if you're an aggressive personality, you should remain true to that and play in an aggressive manner. However, if you're more a cautious player, you should play cautious. So I find that fascinating. It kind of speaks to the idea that there's no one way of playing chess. It reminds me of back when I played League of Legends, and I got to a somewhat high level. I would say top 10% in the world, which is still not that great. But I was platinum and platinum 5, and uh, I always wondered, there's different ways of playing that game too. It's a multiplayer online battle game, one of the most famous in the world. And you can play aggressive, you can play passive and cautious. And I was like, which way is best? Either way could work. Maybe there's like a middle ground that's actually best. Sometimes I found like the middle ground where you're sometimes aggressive, but you're sometimes passive. It just depends on situation to be the best. But at least, when Gary spoke, it was like, oh, okay, so there's multiple ways of playing. There's not just one pure, accurate move all the time. And so he really encourages that. Gary's more of a dynamic player and personality type, so that's how he plays. So remain true to yourself. Josh Waitzkin also kind of recommends a similar thing. So, how do you apply that to life? Well, think about it. Some people just try and force themselves to be a certain way when they're not. I have definitely thought, well, maybe if I pretend to be this kind of cocky, extroverted, confident, suave, smooth guy, then girls would like me because that's what girls seem to like. And each time I've done it, throughout my life, I realized that wasn't me, and the girls could see through it. And even when they couldn't, it just came off kind of stunted and just did not work. So, at least for me, I feel like it's just better to be myself. In career, some people are more uh, go-getters and they're straight to the point. They're very efficient. They're very business oriented. That comes with pros and cons, but it is who you are, and perhaps you can build off some of those things to be better at and improve upon them since you already have a little bit of a talent there. Maybe if you're good at getting sales already, you should kind of double down on that and look to get a sales job and really see what you can do there to improve yourself. So I found that very, very interesting. Now I'm going to jump into poker here because I think most of my research here is on chess, but I also took the masterclass by Dan Negreanu and Phil Ivey, two of the widely regarded best Texas Hold'em poker players of all time. Dan, uh, I think he likes to be called Daniel. Actually, Daniel, he has won millions of dollars in poker, so you can tell he's credible. He's been doing this for years and stayed on the top. And one thing he recommends is never getting complacent. And he's remarked that a lot of these top poker players that were used to be, the top in the game many years ago, they've all but disappeared. They've disappeared from the game, and the reason is because they got complacent. They weren't willing to adapt to the times and change and evolve and get better, and so they just fell off. And with poker, it's constantly evolved. It went from a 7 card stud playing style to much more interest in a Texas Hold'em style, and then now to a no limit style from a limit style. And then Daniel evolved with the times; those other people did not, and he changed formats. More so than that, he really believes that complacency is really what leads to failure. When you think you've mastered a game and you've gotten so good at it, you end up getting complacent. You just think, I can just sit back and relax. Well, that's when the young people kind of start to overtake the old people. And he thinks it applies to business as well. And I firmly believe it does apply to business. I've seen many, many companies through my study of business history uh, just go bankrupt because at first when they were young and new, they were these upstarts and they changed the game and they made a lot of money. They became so successful that they became super established, slow, bureaucratic, and complacent. And when you get these big companies, Walmart, Barnes and Noble, Toys R Us, Blockbuster, all these companies and more, they've started to kind of slow down, and Sears is another, and let these new upstarts take the way. And that never ends. Some of these new companies today that are still seen as somewhat fresh, but have become established, like Facebook, Amazon. You might not believe it, but one day they will be seen as old and recognized, but too familiar, and they'll start to get slow and complacent, and that's when something new comes along and takes it over. The one company I think that's done a good job of staying vigilant is Coca-Cola. Believe it or not, they've done a great job staying vigilant, and that's the thing. When you get complacent, you let these new companies slide. You don't see them coming. Coca-Cola was so vigilant, and when Virgin Cola, which had a real potential of becoming a threat, when it came into the U.S., it kneecapped Virgin Cola, and Coca-Cola, took over. There was a real chance of Virgin Cola, like, kind of taking some serious market share, but they didn't let that happen. They saw the threat and they killed it. So they're always expanding their competitive advantage, which is great, despite their success. And I was reading another one would be Adidas and Nike. I was reading Phil Knight's book on how he founded Nike. The book's called Shoe Dog, and same story. Nike was this young upstart, and Adidas just never really. They were this huge giant, and they never really considered Nike a threat until it was too late. Nike just slowly, silently crept up, grew, and became extremely established until it became a severe competitor to Adidas, which it is still is today. The one thing that Adidas did right was it held on and did not go bankrupt. So very interesting stuff there. I really think that it's worth understanding. So that's the second tip. Now jumping back to uh, the chess world, I kind of want to pad on to the first tip a bit. I'm reading my notes here, and one thing that Josh Waitzkin mentions. Remember, the first tip was to just kind of uh, welcome and adopt your strengths and personality type rather than play to something you're against, or try and be something you're against. Kind of along those lines, you could call it this tip three is Josh Waitzkin recommends choosing a mentor or a coach that fits your style of your personality style and your training model. Um, there's this scene from The Office when Daryl is at the gym with Dwight, and Dwight is just yelling and screaming at him, trying to get him to work out, and Daryl responds, "I do not respond to that stuff." And that's a great, simple example of how that works. Josh Waitzkin actually made the same mistake when he was young as a child prodigy. He had one coach initially who was, this decorated, amazing, respected teacher. However, the way that he taught was just too aggressive and disciplinarian that it did not work and respond well and cause Jaws to respond well. So ultimately, through some trial and error, they decided to go with another coach, and that really made a huge difference in his way of playing. So really, not just expand this not just to your teacher or your coach, but also to your learning styles and your personalities. Josh had to go through a few chess teachers to learn this lesson. His last teacher, uh, a grandmaster, ended up putting him off of the game of chess completely, which kind of pushed him towards adopting uh, the uh, the world of Tai Chi Chuan push hands. His teacher kind of forced a slow defensive style. However, Josh's personality and play style had been attacking and aggressive until that point. Uh, and he was forced to change. So I find that very fascinating. Here you have a grandmaster who's supposedly, one of the best in the world, and yet even he is giving kind of inaccurate advice here compared to what Gary Kasparov recommends. It's almost the antithesis of what Gary said, which is, you shouldn't try and force a personality type that isn't you in your chess playing style. So incredibly interesting. And it just correlates. The story correlates with what Robert Greene mentioned in his book Mastery. He asserts that you should choose a mentor with a teaching style that doesn't rub you the wrong way with your personality. So, moving on to tip number 4. I'm going to try and keep this episode concise because I just want to make sure not to ramble too much. Keep it to a nice 30 minutes, I'm estimating. So, the next thing would be on levels of play. Whether that's chess or poker or any type of skill set, there are certain levels and stages you have to hit. And everything is based on that. Now, each of these 3 people that I've discussed today, Gary, Daniel, and Josh, all mention this in their own specific ways. You always have certain levels or modals of understanding of a problem. And once you understand that, you build off that paradigm and get to higher and higher levels to get to understand more paradigms. And the more intelligent and skilled you become, the more of these you have. Gary explains it as patterns in chess. He said that his mentor told him at a young age that, the difference between a beginner, a stronger player, a strong player, or even a world class player or world champion is simply the amount of patterns that that player can recognize and understand. The more skilled a chess player is, the more patterns that they can recognize, and it's as simple as that. And so this the key there is to understand and learn more patterns. And as far as Josh Wayskin describes it, it's for him it's more about he kind of describes it in a more kind of geometric way. He uses like the term, I think he uses pyramids. So he describes kind of creativity or mastery like different levels of a pyramid. First, when you're a beginner, you have that first level, which is very basic knowledge, technical understanding of the game. Here's a pawn, here's what a pawn does. And then as you progress, you start to learn, get to higher and higher levels that build off the first level. So you can't get to the next level without understanding the levels before it. If you don't know how a pawn works in a game, you can't start to build off that. And so, as you start to progress, you start to build higher and higher levels of internal information. Now, you might think that this is obvious, but what we're really doing is we're making you aware of these and then creating a formula, a, a strategy, a plan for crystallizing and understanding these levels or chunks, as he calls it. So once you understand one chunk, then you build into another chunk, and then sometimes you have chunks of those 2 chunks inside that chunk, and then there could be chunks of that chunk as well. Um, each level has technical information, and as you advance to the next level, you've internalized the information of the current level enough into your unconscious. Uh, he calls this numbers to leave numbers. And so, once you're aware of it, now you can really start to crystallize it, because I don't think if you're not aware of it as well as I am or these masters are, you just kind of go off your gut and you're never really sitting down and kind of writing out and crystallizing in your head, okay, this is chunk number 1, here's what I need to know, and from A to Z. And by not doing that and being particular and just kind of going with the flow, you might have a mastery of 80% or 67% or some portion of that chunk, but you don't know it down pat because you've never taken a moment to just check, do I really know this from A to Z, and how do these chunks and patterns relate to each other? At first, your progress will be like a runner just starting to run on a cold day. It will be stiff and slow. After extensive practice, you start to thaw and your thinking becomes free like a runner in stride. Joss calls his idea of mastering the fundamentals first making smaller circles. First, you master a fundamental principle, like a straight punch or central control in chess. Then you maintain the feeling and core ideas of the principle, but take tiny steps to refine it. I think in most skill sets, this naturally comes with the teaching, but as you've seen previously, sometimes the teaching can be off, the teacher can be off. So just keep in mind, don't rush it. Some people rush to an advanced chunk or level before they're really ready for it, until eventually it's intuitive. As a competitive state piano player, when I was in high school, uh, you know, it makes a lot of sense to me. I remember certain areas where, I had to uh, first focus on knowing the notes and how they corresponded to the keyboard, and then playing a note one finger at a time. Ultimately, I got to a point where I saw my hands not as 10 different instruments, but really two instruments, one per hand, and almost as if those two instruments were split into two, as if there was uh, two a melody and a accompaniment going on in both hands. That's how I pictured my piano playing. It was kind of intuitive. So, in the spirit of time, let's move on to the next tip. Um, oh yeah, before I do, I have to mention what Daniel Negreanu says about this, just very briefly. He calls it not patterns, but kind of levels. So first level is how to play the game. Second, and then you start with what do I have, and then you progress to what does my opponent have, and then you progress to you know what does he think I have, and then the levels just keep adding to there almost infinitely. What does he think I have? What does what do I think he has that I have? So it just keeps progressing in a similar manner. You start and you build from there. Okay, moving on to the next tip. This one's very basic and probably the most common piece of advice out there, but it can't be overstated, and that is uh, you have to practice, practice, practice. Gary Kasparov starts off his master course by just saying, you might be expecting some secrets, but ultimately it comes down to practice, practice, practice. And that's the case for any skill set. I remember when I took one of my first Brazilian jiu-jitsu classes, and I was asking, what tips do you have to progress quickly and so forth. And the teacher was just like, there's no tricks. You just have to practice repeatedly every day, over and over again. And that's just true. There are ways of speeding up your progress, which is what Josh Waitzkin's whole book is about. Um, but even he says, at its core, it's about extensive practice to get those things fixed in until they become intuitive. And despite all his claims in the book about how you can accelerate and learn faster than others, as he did, he still practiced himself to death in the stories he told in the book. So keep that in mind. Now, moving on to the next tip. Let's touch on the unconscious mind. Now, this one's interesting. I think everyone of these three and others I've studied cover this. I actually wrote an entire blog post profiling dozens upon dozens of athletes, business people, world champions on their use of gut intuition. Even The Rock uses it. However, you can check that out later if you search my blog, willyoulaugh.com. What I want to talk about is what these people think about the unconscious mind. Now, Daniel Negreanu, he thinks of the unconscious mind and gut intuition as something that is too much data to be processed by the conscious mind, but it is something based off sometimes hundreds or thousands of hours of play that just triggers something to tell you that something's fishy. and the conscious mind can't process it in that moment, but he recommends always going with your first gut instinct. That's what your unconscious mind is trying to tell you. So I found that very interesting, and it's kind of like a nail in the coffin for me to kind of believe that. You know, obviously, in life you get all these like opinions from just like the general public. I mean, I remember some random person in school once said something like, "Oh, just go with your gut instinct." But do you trust that person? Like, he's not an expert in anything. And so when I hear these from the experts finally, I'm like, okay, that makes more sense. I believe it. Gary Kasparov, I think he talks about this a bit too in his book. However, he says that gut instinct is useless when you don't have those thousands of hours of data. If a beginner in chess with little to no experience tries to use gut instinct while playing chess, it's going to do him no good. It's only through all that experience and processing that subconscious database and your mind really puts itself to work and generates those accurate assessments. So of course he thinks it's very valuable too, but he outlines that distinction, which I think is definitely useful and relevant. So that's something that you should definitely work on as well. And just keep in mind, it's another tool belt in your arsenal. As you progress in life, you will get experience in some skill. Maybe it's not poker or chess, but maybe it's whatever you do for a career. It's maybe it's a business decision you have to keep making, or a career decision, or maybe you do a lot of hiring and firing. Well, you get a gut feeling over time about who's a right hire, who's a bad hire, and of course, maybe hiring is not the best example because then you can get into biases. But there's other stuff. There's maybe you're into negotiation over time, or data analysis, or something else. Gut instinct is definitely very important. Um, in terms of what Josh Waitzkin says, he says some people believe it doesn't exist, but even the greatest chess player of all time says it's the most important thing you can have. Your goal should be to let your unconscious drive front seat without losing the precision of the conscious. They can zoom in on a precise detail. He's talking about the experts in the world while maintaining sharp awareness of their surroundings. Allow the unconscious to flow unhindered. That's what separates the great from the good. Okay, so I want to wrap up with my final tip. And, I have a lot more tips I could share with you on my blog and stuff. If you want a part two to this podcast, you have to reach out, let me know, tweet at me, send me an email, all of it, all the contact info is on my site. Uh, but the final tip I have for you in the world of chess and poker and all this good, fun stuff um, is on how to create a level of uh, preparation to trigger your success. And what I mean by that is, sometimes a lot of the work is done off the playing field. All three of these people mention how, uh, you know, you have to do your homework. A large portion of your skill set, your gameplay, takes place off the board, off the playing field. Um, and that involves a lot of analysis of the games you win or lose. Uh, Many people make the mistake of not analyzing the games they win. Even if you won, you could have played a little bit inaccurately in certain portions. And if you don't analyze that and understand it, then that's something that your opponent will probably recognize and study, and they'll have that advantage the next time you play. So there's always a learning opportunity there, and it's not just about studying your game, although that's important. All these people also emphasize the importance of health and fitness uh, in the sport. You know, even these sports where you're sitting there and it's mostly about your mind because you're not extending extraneous physical activity, moving pieces or cards, they all emphasize the importance of physical fitness and exercise and going to the gym. And all these games are actually they are sports in the way that they remark on how they can tax your physical body too. Gary had a consistent physical fitness routine along with his chess work because it really did emphasize his gameplay. He remarked on how much of a physical demand it could have on his body, despite you know it being seen as a mental game. And so, you have to figure out your weaknesses, the things that you're lacking at, and fix. In certain other sports like football or basketball, where they're blatantly seen as more physical. I've studied some of the top players in these areas too, and I found that some of the top ones really focus on the mental side of the game more so than other players, which really gets them ahead. It's usually what gets unnoticed. So in the football world, it's the mental side. In the chess world, it's the physical side. Um, some of these football players and basketball players, they will study in the off season. They'll just watch videotapes after videotapes of their gameplay and dissect it and analyze it. And that's focusing on the mental side of the game. Um, there's certain ways of conditioning your body and training your mind to improve your willpower, your creativity, your focus, and create energy and growth. So for Josh, he had a certain set of activities that he would use on a conditioned process to create a trigger. Uh, Ask yourself, the feeling you want to achieve, and then ask when do you feel closest to that feeling. So let's say you want serene focus. Well, how can you get close to that? Um, and so when you think about that, you'll probably have a activity already. So a top Smith Barney producer actually asked Josh this question in person, and he went through this exercise, and the answer was, well, when I'm playing catch with my son. So after that, make up a 4-step routine. Maybe it's 3 steps or 2 steps, but Josh just pulled out the number 4. 4-step routine before you play ball with your kid that day. And so when you have that 4-step routine before, you can use that later on when you're not playing ball with your kid to recreate that feeling. It's a form of classical conditioning that I've noticed in uh, other mental toughness books as well. It's basically you're basically using classical conditioning for you rather than being its slave by tying some emotion or feeling that you want with a certain set of triggers. So with Josh, that's just an example that he gave someone who asked about it. For you, you can recreate that serene moment how you see fit. Maybe that's something else. It could be card games or cartwheels that elicits that emotion. And so just be more intentional about how you can, create those triggers and do that right. And if you don't want to spend hours every day getting into the right state of mind, um, you can start to narrow it down, So instead of that 4-step routine, uh, maybe you have to do that initially, but over time you can start to whittle out some of those triggers and just get it to a shorter routine. Uh, Alter the routine so that you can slowly reduce how long it takes to get to that state. So, initially it was eat a light snack, meditate, stretch, play a certain song by Bob Dylan, and then play catch with your son. Well, then once over time you could pull out the light snack part. Now it's 3 steps. Then pull out the stretching. Now it's 2 steps before. And soon enough, over time, with enough repetition, you'll be just playing that song "Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands" by Bob Dylan, and that alone might be able enough to trigger the feeling you want. So there you have it. Lots of different tips and techniques from some masters in poker and chess. Man, I have even more tips for you, but we're running out of time here again. If you want more, check out my website, willyoulaugh.com, or tweet me, contact me. If there's clear demand, I'll do it. And then finally, if you want to check out masterclass.com, please do it through my link. It's an affiliate link. I'll get a commission at no extra cost to you if you buy through my link. It's willyoulaugh.com/masterclass, and it's just a amazing, probably the best, most affordable course library system, kind of like Netflix, for access to courses from all sorts of experts, from Malcolm Gladwell, who teaches writing, to uh, freaking Phil Ivey and Gary Kasparov and Daniel Negreanu, and even tennis players, Serena Williams, and actresses and actors like Samuel Jackson, you name it. Lovely place. Tony Hawk's on there too. Love it. Thank you so much for your time, and hopefully you like this episode. Peace. Oh, yeah, subscribe and rate and leave a review. It really helps.